All right, bam, off and running. There we go. Okay, and then we're going to. All right, here we go. We are talking some exercise selection things today. So a very broad, encompassing topic. So we are going to kind of take a snapshot and zoom in on just, I think, one aspect of exercise selection that can help make this easier for coaches and athletes trying to figure out choosing the right movement at the right time. Again, a lot going on underneath the exercise selection umbrella, but with the sensory to intensity spectrum, I think it's just like one part of the decision-making framework that can help tie some of this stuff together for people. Okay, so as an overview, what we're going to be doing is going through these 4 steps that I already kind of went over in email 1. So step 1, we need to actually understand what in the world this sensory intensity spectrum is, and we have to be able to actually place exercises along that continuum. Step 2 is we need to decide what the goal of the exercise in question is. Step 3, can you perform the exercise maintaining a stack? Step 4, how many reps can you do, quote unquote, air quotes, like it should be air quotes, perfectly? Okay, so step 1 is just kind of having this spectrum in your mind conceptually, right? It's a nice heuristic. It's a principle where on the left side of the spectrum, I have things that are more sensory biased, and don't think of it as absolutes. Think of it as dimmer switches being turned up or down. So on the far left side of the spectrum, I have sensory biased exercises, things that are inherently going to be low load, low velocity, things of that nature. On the right side of the spectrum, we're going more intensity. So I want to see higher loads. I want to see higher velocities. Okay, to help kind of make sense of that a little bit more, we have this chart here, right? So if I think something that is intensity biased, right? I'm thinking I have music blaring. I just like snorted pre-workout. I'm not thinking about like, can I feel my left ab wall and my hamstrings and my quads? Right? Like I'm just focused on mashing as hard as I possibly can. So that is to the far right side of that spectrum with intensity. An example of that would be, I put 85% of your 1 rep max in the bar. I'm like, okay, cool. You're going to take it for reps. Don't think about anything. Just go until you're done. Another example of this could be, I'm going to put 70% of your 1 rep max in the bar, and you're going to get under it, and it's going to be hooked up to this VBT device. And your goal is to move this shit as fast as you possibly can, because I want to see the highest power output I can. When that's the intent, when that's what you're going for, you're not going to feel anything specific. You'll feel everything. Okay? That's the intensity side of the spectrum, right? Like a cue that would go in there for me if I had an athlete and we were going for like max power, like move this as hard and fast as you can. It's like, I want to feel the world move when you drive out of the hole so hard. Okay? And then we go to the other side of the spectrum, which is going to be sensory. Very different. Sensory is all about finding and feeling. It's all about using lower loads, going at slower tempos to ensure that you do feel everything that I or you want to feel, right? So an example movement would be like a 1-arm, 1-leg kettlebell RDL. Nobody cares how much you can 1-arm, 1-leg kettlebell RDL. That's another way to distinguish these. If it's something that someone would ask you and be impressed by, it's probably more intensity based. If it's something that nobody would care about except you, it's probably sensory based, right? It's like a 1-arm, 1-leg RDL is inherently limited, right? You can only do so much weight. You're going to have to go slow so you don't fall over. And it gives you an opportunity to slow down, actually feel abs, and to feel the pelvis moving on a stable femur, and to feel hamstrings, things like that. Another example in this category may be, if we want to think in that squat world, right? Like the difference between my previous example of here's 70% of your max, move it as fast as you possibly can. I could say, hey, we're going to do a Zercher squat. I'm going to give you a little bit of a heel wedge. I want you to think about trying to stack your ribs and your pelvis directly underneath your ears. I want you to reach this bar forward slightly to bring your ribs down and back and actually feel and engage your abs. I want you to think about pulling yourself down and using your hamstrings. Nice, slow, and controlled. Then I want you to think you to push out of the hole and get quads and glutes. And that would be a more sensory biased version of a squat. So we can appreciate the difference from one side to the other. One side is like shut my brain off, go ham. The other side is go slow, feel everything. Okay, again, big picture concepts and ideas here. So what we're going to do now is just actually fill in some exercises to go on both sides of this spectrum so we get an idea of how we're going to classify things, right? So on the intensity side, we're thinking things like an SSB squat, any form of a deadlift, right? Bench press, pull up, all of the big things that we already do and know how to do well, right? These are the money makers for a reason. It's where I can generate maximum amounts of force. It's where I can generate high velocities. It's where I can get high power outputs. It's all the big bilateral movements, right? On the sensory side is where I'm looking at things that are going to be really unilateral in nature, right? I'm thinking split squats, making things that are half kneeling, things that are going to be like tall kneeling, short seated, right? So I'm thinking things are going to be more unilateral in nature or very position focused in nature, right? Because like if I give you a half kneeling one arm landmine press, again, that's an example of an exercise. Like you're not going to be able to do that for that much load or at that high of a velocity. I'm giving you a half kneeling landmine press because I'm trying to get you to feel side abs. I'm trying to learn to inhibit a quad. I'm trying to feel a shoulder blade moving on ribs, right? My goal of that exercise is not max force, velocity, power. As opposed to say, like, if I give you a bench press, it's like, okay, like, let's go party and have some fun and move some weight and move it fast, right? And then, like I said earlier, right, it's a dimmer switch. You have things that can fall all along this spectrum. So if we wanted to just kind of do it for like one movement category at a time, right? Like I could have an SSB squat on the far right side for intensity. Let's see if this will work for me. Nope. I could have a Zercher squat lie more in the middle of this spectrum, right? And then over on the far side, on the sensory side, I could do like a wall supported goblet split squat, right? That's going to be the far other end of my sensory spectrum as opposed to my SSB squat. And I could have a Zercher in the middle, right? And you could do this with lots of different types of exercises. You know, it's like I could even take an SSB squat and make it more sensory focused just by changing how I coach and cue it. It just depends on what you're trying to get out of the exercise. And that's the whole point here. You have to decide, am I chasing an intensity outcome or am I chasing more of a sensory outcome? An intensity outcome is going to be more max force, max velocity, max power. Sensory outcome, more feel, more proprioception, more movement, probably more hypertrophy. Okay, if we want to do this with a press, right, I could say like bench press over here for intensity. I could put a push-up here in the middle. I could put on the far end over here, we could go with my example from earlier. We do like a half kneeling landmine press, right? Could fall on the sensory side of the spectrum. If I wanted to do something deadlift, right, we could go trap bar deadlift for an intensity. I could go with a like snatch grip RDL, something that's going to be more in the middle of the spectrum. And then on the far end, right, we could do like a PB leg curl to one leg eccentric, right? So just some examples to give you kind of an idea of, again, think of this as like a volume, as a dimmer switch, right? We can kind of turn it up, moving to the right, or we can turn it down, moving to the left. And you can place movements and exercises all along the spectrum, just depending on what you want out of the exercise. Okay, so step 2 is then to determine what the goal of the exercise is. Do I want it to be intensity bias or do I want it to be more sensory bias? And before we can get there, right, because this decision is going to be made on a training day basis, we need to appreciate the fact that a lot is happening before I get to the training day, right? And so these categorizations aren't perfect from a textbook standpoint. Like a mesocycle would be more like an annual plan, but for our sakes and purposes here, this categorization will be more than ample. So we have a training meso, which is going to be like the 12 to 16 week training cycle, the 12 to 16 week training block. And the goal is like, you have to ask yourself, what do I want to accomplish in these 12 to 16 weeks? What are my big primary goals? Do I want to focus on strength? Do I want to focus on power? Do I want to focus on hypertrophy, right? Those are probably the 3 big outcomes you could go for. And that's going to dictate everything else once you make those decisions. Then you funnel down to the training macro. And now I'm at a 4-week time window. So now I'm starting to stack up training blocks within my larger training cycle, okay? For example, if you wanted to focus on strength and build strength, right, I'm probably going to run an intensity accumulation phase of some kind. So weeks 1 through 4 are going to be at a lower percentage range than weeks 8 through 12, right? So once you know the big picture outcome you're chasing, you funnel down to the macro and you can stack up your 4-week chunks. From there, we go to the micro. We think, what does 1 week look like within these different 4-week chunks? And that's going to be determined by your weekly training split. In other words, how do you want to distribute your stress load over the course of a training week, right? Do you want to use a 3-3 split, a 4-2, a 5-1, a 2-4, all things that I've talked about before at length at other points in time in the newsletter, on the blog, etc., right? But figure out how am I distributing stress over the course of the week. And then we finally get down to a training day. And when you get to the training day, right, you should have some templates and things in place that line up with your goals, right? So we're going to use just my basic, what I would call like broadly athlete template, which would be different than a powerlifting or a bodybuilding or even something that was more like CrossFit Metcon template, right? This is just all around athlete, life proof athlete, apex athlete, hybrid athlete, whatever the fuck people want to call it these days, right? But that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to use that template when we talk about the training day, but I just wanted to zoom out and make sure that we appreciate there are things that have to happen to funnel us down to the training day, which is when we start deciding what the goal of an exercise is. So once we have our training day template, right, and this is what mine generally looks like for all-around athlete, you have a prep section, an agility, change of direction section, power, you have a main lift section, and then you have your accessories. And so all you have to do at this point is go chunk by chunk, section by section, and ask yourself, do I want this to be more intensity biased? Do I want it to be more sensory biased? Right? So here's an example of what that could look like. This is probably my favorite way of laying it out on the average. Prep is always sensory. It can't not be sensory. It's prep, okay? So you're really deciding between agility, power, main lift, and accessories. Where do you want to push the gas pedal and chase max force, max velocities, max power? Where do you want to back off and go slower, focus a little bit more on movement, focus a little bit more on feel, focus maybe a little bit more on hypertrophy, right? So here's an example of how I would lay out a training day. Agility would be more sensory biased. My power section is going to be a little bit more intensity biased. My main lift section will be more intensity biased. And my accessory section is then going to be more sensory biased. The key here is you only get to assign 2, maybe 3 intensity sections in a training day. Everything can't be intensity. You got to pick, ideally 2. I try to force myself to 2. I can stretch to 3 though, depending on the athlete and where we are in a training cycle. Okay, and then let's actually put in some movements and exercises to make this kind of tie all together. So prep is just your warm-up stuff. The agility section, right? The agility section is where I see, okay, sensory, I could do something like a medicine ball side jab step. Low intensity, lower velocities. It's kind of like an early change of direction movement drill. In the power section, I'm chasing intensity. So maybe I'm going more of a repeat vertical jump. In the main lift, chasing intensity, right? It could be intensity for strength, power, hypertrophy. I'm going safety bar squat. On the accessory section, I'm going to chase sensory. So maybe it's a circuit of a half kneeling, landmine press, a PB leg curl, and a seated one-arm cable row. Right? All things that fall more on the sensory side of that spectrum. Lower loads, lower velocities, more feel. Okay, next up is step 3 is just basically, can you maintain the stack or a stack, the stack, while you're performing the exercise? And so the easiest, simplest way for us to show this is kind of like with these little lines and graphics here, right? So a stack is essentially just saying, can you stack your ribs on top of your pelvis, right? So on the left side, we see yes, ribs stacked on top of pelvis. If you think of it like a mouth, ribs are the top of the mouth, pelvis is the bottom of the mouth. I want ribs down, pelvis under. Nice stack position, right? That's what you see on the left. Anterior side, posterior side, ribs on top, pelvis on bottom, nice stack position. What you see a lot of people do most of the time, right, where you're going to see is this position over here, right, where the mouth opens and I'm kind of open on the front anteriorly and I'm more closed off posteriorly, right? A little bit more open on the front anteriorly. Hold on a second, got to let a couple of people into the call. Hope they haven't been waiting too long. Yeah, sorry if you guys are waiting a while. I didn't see the participant list there. My good. Okay, but anywho, right, so we have the stack. Ribs on top, pelvis on bottom. I want to see this position, right? Because if I can't get this position, or let me rephrase this. This position sets you up for your arms and legs to be able to work well, okay? If you find yourself on the right, where I'm more open anteriorly, ribs are kind of like up, externally rotated in your face, pelvis dumping water out of the bucket moving forward. This is a position where your arms and legs have a harder time functioning, okay? This is with an asterisk because the position on the right is kind of where you have to go when we're talking max power output. Like if you're a 100-meter sprinter, if you're Usain Bolt, I don't necessarily want you to be this when you line up to run a world record 100. I probably want you more like this because it decreases degrees of freedom. You're most powerful at this position. I just don't want you in this position all the time. I would rather coach and work in this position and learn to control it. So the stack, right? And so the question is, this is kind of your first exit strategy. If you cannot maintain the stack, so if I give someone a movement, right, and I want to see this nice kind of ribs down, pelvis under, solid position, if I give them a movement and we're immediately like, bam, here, I got work to do. So I either just need to coach and cue it differently because maybe the athlete doesn't understand what I want. Maybe I just missed. I need to pick a different exercise. Maybe I just decrease the range of motion of the exercise I have, right? Maybe I elevate the deadlift. Maybe I decrease the range of motion on an RDL. I could load the exercise differently, right? Like maybe giving someone on their back, right? Because if I go to your back, it's driving you this way. If I give you something anteriorly to load, like a Zercher or an SSB where you can reach your hands forward, right? I'm stacking the deck in your favor, no pun intended, to be able to maintain this position. I could add restraints, like laying you on the floor, sitting you on the floor, giving you different reference centers that make it easier for you to get into and maintain this position, the stack. Or I could change the stance, right? Like maybe tall kneeling's a really poor option for you and you just can't do it yet. So maybe half kneeling's a better place to start. All right, step 4 is this perfect reps, right? So if we're giving an exercise to someone, and this is gonna be more of a sensory bias thing, I wanna see 7 out of 10 reps look about as perfect as I can draw it, but I want to see the athlete, the person in front of me, have to work and struggle a little bit for 3 of the reps. Because if they just blow through 10 reps and they're all perfect and there are no issues, right, it's too easy. I missed the boat somewhere. So I wanna see 7, maybe 8 reps out of 10 perfect. I need to see 2 or 3 reps where they're having to work and struggle to maintain position and be where they want to be and do the exercise correctly, okay? And so if it's too easy, right, now we can start figuring out what do we want to do. Like I can increase load is really easy. I can increase the velocity because when I start adding load and velocity, maintaining that good position is harder and harder. I can change how I load the movement. I could add a perturbation or an unstable load, right? Greg Robbins talked about that on the podcast we did a couple of weeks back. Highly recommend listening to. I think he did a good job explaining it, right? You could also change the stance. And these are just a few of the options, a few of the things that you can turn to help kind of like ramp the exercise up so that you're appropriately meeting the athlete where they are and challenging them so you can get the change and adaptation you're seeking, okay? So those are the 4 steps. Understand what the spectrum is, be able to place exercises on it, decide what the goal of the exercise is. In that training day template, pick what section is trying to accomplish what thing. Is it trying to be intensity biased? Is it trying to be sensory biased? Step 3, your first exit strategy, when you watch the athlete or watch yourself or feel yourself do the exercise, can you maintain a stack? Step 4, how many reps do you do perfectly, right? And kind of tie this back to what I said at the very beginning of the talk. Exercise selection is a very broad umbrella. There's anatomy, biomechanics, lots of things going on. So the sensory intensity spectrum is just one way to think about managing exercise selection. It's one of the tools in the toolbox, but hopefully this gives you a nice overview of it. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. So the people on the call, if y'all have any questions, you can like unmute yourself and ask. You can type in the chat, really whatever you want to do for questions, I am down to answer.
So for the change of direction, or like I guess the like agility side of that first thing, what would be some examples of like of like a really intense agility drill, I guess? Like maybe just even a sprint? Is that crazy?
Yeah, so like I think an intense version of an agility section would be, I set an 8-second timer for you. And I'm like, okay, imagine you're on a football field. We're going to stand on a goal line. I'm like, you have 8 seconds to get as far as you can, going 5 back, 10 back, 15 back, etc. You got to go, right? That'd be very different than like a change of direction drill, right?
Like a pogo even?
Yeah,
like
right. Like that medicine ball side jab, like anything where it's just like you're breaking the movement down and it's more drill based, more sensory. When you're starting to put a clock on it and you're worried more about like touches, distance covered, things like that, now we're going more intensity.
Okay, cool. So like, okay, yeah, that helps. Cool.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Let's see. Anything else? The agility one is kind of, it's a weird one to think through. You can tie it back to the force velocity stuff too.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly what I was thinking. So, and then so for like power, like and so what would be like a very sensory, I guess, like power thing, I guess.
Yeah, so that is kind of like it's like an oxymoron. Right? It's like the power block is there on that training day to ensure it gets prioritized at some point. But yeah, so like
just
an example,
how far it is up, I guess, would be the difference.
Yeah, so it is like a little bit of an oxymoron.
Stuff. Yeah.
But if you think about that section, right? So if I give you like an extensive unilateral hop, so you literally just like, I'm on one leg, I'm just going to extensive, it's like easy, just repeatable hops for like 10 yards. That's something that may go early in a program that's setting me up for like depth drop jumps or other like true intensity power movements later on. I'm just putting it in like the power section of my training template because I know that's where the progression is going to flow through. Like the extensive hop is not really like, you're not getting powerful from that, just setting us up for the things to come. And so it just fits in that section. But yeah, like you said, it's not a perfect classification, but yeah, it's like easy pogo hops, extensive hopping. Yeah, any of those things would be on the sensory side of the power, like chunk of your training day.
So, and sprints could go in either category, or that's going to be more on the power side?
So, I don't think you can do a sensory bias sprint, right? Unless you
well, I'm saying change of direction versus power, or now we're just getting into semantics.
So for me, like change of direction, I would not put sprinting. I would put sprinting in the power section.
Lost.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Now you got me. Yeah, I would put sprinting. Sprinting goes in that power block for me in a training day. Like if I wanted to dial down and make it more sensory, it could just be tons of like drill work, right? It's like skips, things of that nature. Like I'm doing more like on the agility and on the sprinting stuff, things that are more sensory are just drill work because we're breaking down the movement. We're going slow to try to feel things. Drills. If you take those away and it's like, okay, now it's going to be a performance-based thing, we're more on the intensity side.
So yeah, so I guess I could think of it like, and you said it before for the other stuff, but if you're looking directly for like a number output, think more that high intensity, and then versus position work or
Yeah.
looking for a certain little thing.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah,
Sweet.
and generally over the course of a program, you'll probably flow a little bit more sensory to intensity, right?
Okay.
Because most things are trying to peak a power output of some kind for athletes, because I'm trying to
Mhm.
get them back on a field, or even like for the guys that I train, right? It's like we're usually at some point in time always getting to some type of a peak week where I'm trying to see like better jump improvement, better sprint improvement, better lift improvement. So things naturally kind of flow more sensory to intensity, right? And that's just an intensity accumulation process.
Sweet.
Yep. Dope. Anything else? I don't think John's here anymore. He ghosted me. Excellent. All right. Beautiful. That'll do it then. Eric, nothing else? You're good?
I'm good on that. I will hopefully have some questions for the next one.
All right. Beautiful. We are done then.
Awesome. String a bunch of these together and